Next, we will understand the one of the fundamental building blocks of the DAX, the calculated column and calculated measure, calculated table. Okay, how do we create these three things? Already we have seen how to create a calculated column, how to create a calculated measure, and what exactly exact difference are there, amongst these three. And calculated table also we can use it. So when I suppose to use calculated column, when I suppose to use calculated measure, that we will discuss it now. The calculated column is an extension of the calculated column. In this case, this is, let me do one thing. I just go here. So here, what is the calculated column? So all these columns were already available, except the list price and sales amount. These two columns were created by us. These two columns are my calculated column. This is an extension to my pre-existing table. Okay. And in this case, these calculated column values are evaluated for each row. And importantly, these calculated columns live in the X velocity in-memory storage. How many of you remember the X velocity engine? That is the workhorse behind the DAX. Behind the scene, I was talking about the not only DAX, the connectivity, import connectivity. So in the case of import connectivity, the X velocity kicks in and then it converts your tabular data into columnar data, and then it does the encoding and compress the data and load the data in memory. Remember? So whenever you created a calculated column, this one will get stored in the memory in memory, just like the other data you import from, we imported from this Excel file. Okay. This calculated column is virtually the same as non-calculated column. Okay, but one exception here. So their values are calculated using DAX formulas. So here in this case, we did not use any DAX formulas. Okay, and we will see how to use a DAX formula here also. And also, right, the values of these calculated columns, we derived from other columns like this, right? So already sales column was there, and then quantity column was there, and then we divided the sales column by quantity. This is division. Okay, and we are able to get the listed price and sales amount. We multiplied the listed price with the quantity to get the sales amount. Okay, hope you understood why I create a listed price. Let's say in the real-time scenario, we don't have the sales column. Yes, Soumya, tell me your question. Yes, the real-time scenario. Yeah, you can unmute yourself on top. Real-time scenario, you don't have, the sales amount column is available. In
Sir,
the
can you repeat that listed prices once again?
listed price, I just clicked it here. Okay, now you understood, right? How to create a new column, Soumya?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You need to go here, click on new column. I'll just show you one more time. Click on new column. This is simple thing, okay? But in real time, you will not be performing just like that to get the price. So what I do is a listed price. I just, for your sake, I'm doing it. So what I do is already sales amount is there in my table. Okay, divided by the quantity. If you do it, you will get the price. You understood?
Yes, I
Okay.
just want to know the formula, sir.
Yeah. So this formula, don't literally go by this formula because the sales amount here, it could, after deducting the tax, you will get the sales amount, and some customers you would have given discount. Okay, and again the right, the prices will also change over a period of time. It is not same. If you see the festival, Diwali, Christmas, or any, in the case of US, Good Friday or Cyber Monday, Black Friday, those kind of times, they change the prices to uh, to keep up the momentum or to sustain the momentum or to keep up the prices on par with their competitors. All the e-commerce company, they offer cheaper price, right? They give these offers during the festival or that time. So in this case, the assumption is we don't have the sales column. Okay, if I don't have the sales column, I need to create a sales column. How do I do that? So what for that, I just use this formula, but don't literally go by this formula. Don't worry. What I will do is sometime tomorrow, I will send you the formulas, everything. Okay, what we use it. We call it as a KPIs. And also I will share the assignment, another assignment, DAX related assignment. Start work on it. If you cannot work on it, what we'll do is next weekend, we will dedicate one day, because so far in class assignment, we did not do it. The reason why I did not do it was right. You can go and download and you can do the assignment during the weekdays, because you have 5 days time and then come back with questions. Okay. And in that case, what will happen is I will try to, help you out where you missed out, or if you submit your thing, right? The report file, I will check it, and where the problem is, and I'll try to fix it, or I will give you the solution. Okay, this way we can utilize the time effectively. If I dedicate a separate session, it will take longer time, right? One session will, 1 or 2 sessions, one weekend, we will be spending only for this one. If you do it proactively on a weekdays, 5 days, you will obviously will encounter errors, mistakes. What you do is you can watch my video and you can go and search it in the Google also, and try to fix it on your, so that you will remember it forever. Okay, even we people working on day in day out basis, but we are working multiple technologies. Okay, and even we forget it. Okay, but only thing is practice. Okay, fine. So now you understood, right? This is just a, don't literally go by this formula. This is for you to understand. Basically, I just simulated something. We don't have the sales amount column available in my data set. I have price is available and the quantity is available. I need to create the sales amount column. This is a calculated column to show you how, what exactly the calculated column is all about. For this, I have used this one. Okay. So the calculated columns are used for row by row calculation. So in this case, what will happen? It goes each and every row. It performs row by row calculations, and it is pre-calculated and stored in memory. Okay. And it will not get recalculated when filter changes on the dashboard. For example, if I go here and if I select something else, I put some text value along with this. I just put one simple column, category. I want this category column to appear, as a first column. I just come here, I just move this up, drag this up and drop it here. And still it is not the first one. Probably I'll move this down here. Okay. Now the category column is first and all the values are same. Okay. Here, what I do is I just create some slicer. I just move this up. And when I select furniture or any specific thing, look here, when I select these two things, only those values I selected as part of this slicer gets reflected, it gets filtered here. Only the furniture and technology related data are showing here. Okay, so when I make a selection, what of the select, for example, if I select office supplies, it display office supplies related values here. So here what I'm trying to say is, in the case of calculated column, this will not get recalculated. This will not recalculated when you make a changes in your filter or slicer. So to summarize, what is calculator column? Calculator column is used for row by row calculation. It is pre-calculated and stored in memory. And also, right, it will not get recalculated when the filter changes in your report or dashboard. But it increases the size of your model because you are adding more number of columns. Right? If you add 1 or 2 columns is fine, but in the real time scenario, we will end up creating more than 2 or 3 columns. Obviously, as you include new columns in your table, the table size will increase. If the volume of data is very huge, 1 million records, let's say 50 million records are there in this table. If you add new columns, what will happen? It will consume a lot of memory also. Okay, so if somebody is asking you in the interview, what is your answer? What is calculated column? It is used for performing row by row calculation. Okay, in the case of calculated column, it uses row context. You need to say this way, row context. Okay, and it is the calculated columns are pre-calculated and it is stored in memory. It is not going to get recalculated whenever we make any selection in the filter or the slicer. The one flip side of the calculated column is it increases the size of your model. That's it. Okay. Now I just go here and then I'll walk you through what is a calculated column. Let's go step by step. Calculated column is a new column created from two or more existing columns. You remember listed price into quantity, two columns, right? A column is a new column created two or more existing columns. We have used the listed price into quantity to derive a new column called sales amount. Okay, and it is calculated row by row in a data table. So it is also called as a row context. This is the one we will be using it more frequently in the later part of this session. And the calculated column is often used as an intermediate step to obtain a final result. Sometimes we will use this as an intermediate step to obtain a final result. Okay, so what do you mean by intermediate step? For example, I just wanted to know the cost of goods sold. I want to know the cost of goods sold. Uh, right, in that case, what I do is to understand the cost of goods sold, what I do is I'm going to create another column. In this case, I'm going to create another column. So let's say, we are going to have some cost price. I'm going to say the cost price. But what I do now is just for simulation purpose, I'm doing it. Don't go literally buy this one. Okay. What is my listed price? 636, right? What I do is the listed price to this is the sales amount 1908 by 3. Okay, so in this case, it gives me each product price is 636. Okay, what I need to do here is I need to add this one. Okay, list price to okay. What I'm going to do is I just say 3 is and 30. Okay, I just use this is going to be 30. Just say 0.03. Okay, not this one. And okay, I just say okay. So obviously the cost price should be less than your price, right? Selling price. List price is nothing but the selling price. Let's say this column also given by your manager. Okay, you don't have to do all these things. This is just for the temporary sake, right? I just use this one. Don't you can simply ignore this one, and you just think we have a column by the name cost price and selling price is available, and then we don't have the sales amount column. Hence, we create a new sales amount column by multiplying the quantity by list price. We are able to get this one, and listed price is available. Okay, fine. the cost price is available. Now what I do is, the next thing is I'm going to create new column. In this case, I'm going to say margin. Margin, here I say I just say the margin is going to be, okay, or otherwise I just say cost of goods sold is equivalent to the quantity into the cost price. If I multiply the quantity by list price, that gives me the sales amount. Okay. And the actual cost price, if I use it to multiply, this is the cost of goods sold. If I subtract the cost of goods from my sales amount, I can get my margin. So this is an intermediate step. Okay. I just use this one, new column. Without cost of goods sold, can you compute the margin? You cannot do it, right? So this is what your margin. You can go and especially look at a lot of decimal values are there. What you do is you can go and format it here, auto 0 or something like that. 2, you can just say 2 here and press enter. This is how you can format it here. Okay, 2 decimal is fine for me, fine. Now this is the intermediate step. Okay, and then we get this one. So what is an example for we were able to obtain the margin by computing the cost of goods sold first, and then we are subtracting the cost of goods sold from my sales. And you might be arguing this one. So whatever the formula that I used it here, the same thing, can't I use it here itself? Yes, we can do it. But for the sake of understanding, I just explained you with this, what exactly this one says, right? To understand this context, I explain this one. Next one is, it is calculated at the time of refreshing the memory. Only when you refresh your memory. For example, if I go here and if I click on the home and you have a refresh button, when you click on it, this formula will get refreshed. Otherwise, it will not get refreshed. Okay. And it is not going to recalculate it when the filter or slicer changes on a report or dashboard. It is pre-calculated and stored, like I said earlier. Fine. Okay. Now we understood what exactly calculated column in the interview. At the time of interview, they ask you what you need to do. It is calculated row by row in the data table. It is pre-calculated and stored in memory. It is calculated at the time of refreshing the memory. It will not get recalculated when filter changes on the dashboard. Instead, it will get calculated at the time of refreshing the memory. Only when you refresh it, it will get recalculated. Otherwise, it will not get recalculated. The next one is, what is a measure? What is it? Now we will take a look at the measure. Measure in Power BI are used for defining the calculation or formula. Even using calculated column, we define the formula. Similarly, even using measure, we can define the formula. But we use measure in general to perform aggregations, like sum function, average function, right? Unlike calculated column, it is not pre-calculated. This can be an advantageous, but there is a flip side attached to that. It is not pre-calculated. Let's say in this case, I have created the total sales measure. Okay, this is a total sales measure. When I click on it, you can see there is a measure. This measure name is total sales. Similarly, this was also a measure. 3 measures I created it. Let's start with this measure. This measure, on the right side of this one, it performs the sum on the sales column, and then the output will get stored in this measure. You cannot see the value stored in the total sales instantly. Only when you drag and drop this measure into your visual, in this case, the table is the visual, you can see the value stored in your total sales column. So it is pre-calculated. So it is not pre-calculated. The measure, only when you drag and drop it here, it will get computed on the fly. Hence, it requires, it is a CPU intensive process. It is a CPU intensive process, whereas the calculated column or memory intensive, it requires more memory, but it is already, we calculated the data and we stored it there. But here, every time, whenever you drag and drop it, it will get recalculated. Other thing is, for example, when I make a selection in my filter, whenever I make changes here, this one will get recalculated. It requires, a lot of computations. Hence, it is CPU intensive. The measure is not going to live in your data set. Rather, it is calculated on the fly whenever called upon. That's why I explained it. So this measure is not stored in memory. Unlike calculated column, it's not stored in memory. It can be reused on other measures. The same measure I can reuse it on other measures that I will show you with other example. Don't worry, okay? And measures recalculate each time when the user changes the filter or the values in a slicer and can cause your report to respond slowly. The volume of the data is very high, and if the calculation or the business rule which you are using it here in the measure or very complex one, your report will be very slow. Okay, it will not reflect immediately. It will take some time. And again, depends if the volume of the data is very high, it will add more burden on your system. Now you got a fair amount of idea what is the difference between calculated column and measure. There are within measure, there are two types. One is the implicit measure. The other one is the explicit measure. What do you mean by implicit measure? The auto summarization is a classic example, right? That is done by Power BI automatically. It applies on the numeric column is called your implicit measure. For example, here, as soon as you load the data into your Power BI desktop, right below this fields pane, you will find this table name, column name, and any column which just in front of any column you find sigma. That is your implicit measure. It applies, right? The auto summarization, the automatic summarization happens on this numeric column automatically. Okay, we did not create any measure, but when you click on the sales column, when you click on it double time, and you can see that the sales is a decimal number data type. And if you see on the right side, summarization, look here, it use sum. This is auto summarization. Okay, so this is called your implicit measure. I just show you one more time. I create another table here. Look here, I just drag and drop it here. 67,000. Look here, this is my total, isn't it? So this is my total. In this case, I have created a measure, total sales. But here I did not create any measure. The moment when I dragged and dropped it, automatically it gives me the total sales. This is called auto summarization. It is also called as an implicit measure. Okay, so the implicit measure is not necessarily always sum. You can change it. For example, if I select sales here, and you can go and change it here, average or minimum. But it is not a good practice. Don't change it here. You can use your DAX function and you can do it. Hope you understood what is implicit measure. So in the case of sales, and if you see quantity, there is some, we don't see it here. There is some text data type problem here. We need to address it. Okay. So the sales column, any column, if you see, the sigma notation along with the columns, right? Those columns are numeric data type. Number one. Number two is those columns are auto summarized column. Okay, they aggregates on its own. Okay, you don't have to write some function at all explicitly. The explicit measure is the one which we created. Like I have shown you the total sales. Look here, total sales. These three measures I created. This is called a explicit measure. We explicitly created the measure. Okay, now we will compare side by side. What is the difference between calculated column and versus measures? Calculated column stored the difference. The calculated columns are stored in memory, whereas measure is not stored in memory, and it calculates at the time of report refresh, and it consumes memory, and row by row calculation is done usually. For example, if you want to compute the profit, they'll ask an example here. You can give the profit. You have something called sales amount minus cost, right? Cost of goods sold. If you subtract the cost of goods sold from your sales amount, you get the profit or margin. And the difference between these are, it is stored in memory, it is not stored in memory. It is calculated at the time of refresh, but it calculated on the fly, and it consumes CPU. And here, usually it is a result of an aggregation. Okay, here it is not necessarily aggregation. You remember list price into quantity gave me the sales amount, but there we are multiplying the columns. We are not doing the aggregation. Aggregation is sum of sales, sum of units sold or quantity, average sales. These are aggregation function. Measure, we use it most of the time to perform some kind of like sum function. Okay, we use it. So these are the difference between the calculated column and measure. So now the question is, when can I use calculated column? When can I use measure? I got stuck here and I got confused here. Most of the beginners, they get confused here. This is a $1 billion question. So here we have seen here, if you see here, the total sales, if I select this visual got highlighted. On the right side here, you can see what are the columns that are the measures that I used it, columns and measures. You can see it in this table visual. Okay, category column, total sales. Total sales is a measure. Total sales, sum X is a measure. And sales amount. Yeah, so this is sum and sales amount. This is the one is a calculated column. You remember? How many of you remember? For example, here. Look here on the right side, I create the sales amount, right? This column is a calculated column. I just use the calculated column here. But if I use the measure or calculated column, it gives me the same output. So which one can I use it? If the volume of the data is very huge, and if your table has got a lot of columns in it already, then try to use measure instead of using, or let's say, let's put it this way, scenario one. Your data volume is not so high. It is reasonably okay, but the number of columns are more. If you add additional columns, it consumes more memory. Since the volume of the data is not so high, better I avoid creating a calculated column. Instead, I will go ahead with creating a measure, because the measure will not store the value in your table. Okay. And okay, the next question is, in that case, scenario one is fine. What about the other scenarios? Let's say you are using a column in your filter condition, especially the DAX query. In that kind of situation, obviously you need to have the calculated column. And if you want to define an experience that is bound to the current row, then row by row calculation. If you want to perform it, then you have to use calculated column. And if you want to use the value in rows or columns of a pivot table, in that case, you can go for calculated column. And you remember, I have shown you the matrix, how to, what is the row field, what is column field, and when the drill down option get enabled automatically, right? So in that kind of situation, pivot table matrix, using matrix, you can create the pivot table. In the interview, they'll ask you, can you tell me how to create a pivot table? We have matrix visual using which we can create the pivot table. Okay, just by swapping the values from your rows to columns and columns to rows, we can convert the rows, the values from columns to rows and rows to columns using pivot table. That is what pivoting, right? Pivoting and unpivoting, I can do it using matrix by swapping the values between rows and columns. In order to do that, I need to have, in that kind of situations, if I have a calculated column, it will be good. And use the value in a slicer. Let's say you have created a slicer here. This slicer, for this, you don't have a column available already in your existing data set. You have created a calculated column, right? Do some kind of filtering. In that kind of situation, you need to, for a slicer, you need to have a column, right? You cannot use a measure for a slicer. So in that case, you need to have the calculated column. Now the question is when to use a measure. That's what we discussed. If you want to perform some kind of percentage or ratio or some average aggregation functions, in that kind of situation, you can use it. Highlighted visuals. Use a value that reflects user selection of filters, slicer, highlighted visuals. You can use a measure, for example, conditional formatting. If the sales is between so and so value 0 to 500, to display the your table background color as red, so that so the users can understand, okay, these values or in these categories the sales is low. The red color tells me. And the next one is the amber color and green color. Green color tells me good profit, whereas the red color tells me negative margin or zero profit or less profit. You can highlight the visuals with colors, right? Using measure and all, you can do it. So you can do a ratio, you can calculate the ratio or percentage or any aggregations like including ratio and percentage are kind of aggregation, isn't it? So you can do it using measure. If anything comes to measure, you tell them measure is meant for, we use the measure for calculating ratio, percentage, and total sales, that kind of aggregations, that kind of, we used a measure. Measure will get calculated on the fly. Whenever I make changes here in my slicer, the measure will get recalculated. Look here, if I select something different, the measure will get, so all these total sales, sum X, right, it will get executed on the fly. It will cause a burden on your CPU. Whereas the sales amount, it doesn't require CPU because we already calculated. This value is already readily available in my data set. It need not to calculate, right? So that is the difference. Okay, so far you learned the basics of DAX language. You know how to create the calculated column, and you have a good understanding of the common functions used in DAX, the basic functions. Okay, now it's time now to move to the next level in this language. Okay, after learning a solid theoretical background of the DAX, you'll be able to become a real DAX champion. Okay, so next we will